Welcome to Encounter Wargaming. I'm Jay, and this is Retconned and Redacted. Today we continue our adventures into the fluff of the distant past. In case you were watching this series for the first time, in this series we explore all the retconned and or just straight up removed lore that Games Workshop has decided to either change drastically or remove entirely from the 40k universe. Unlike our other 40k lore playlists, this one is by no means chronological, nor does it follow a specific order, so each episode will function as its own entity. If you like this episode and want to check out more Retconned and Redacted, just head to our playlists and listen to this playlist from the beginning. If you've been following along so far, welcome back. Before we get into it, I'd like to take a minute and profusely thank our patrons on Patreon. It's because of you lovely people that we're able to improve our content and keep things running around here. So the rest of you, I guess, need to thank them too. It's because of their generosity that you can enjoy our content. If you'd like to join them as part of the Encounter Wargaming family, then jump down in the description below and click on the Patreon link. Now that that's out of the way, let's get into our topic. Today we'll be discussing a race that still exists in the 40k lore, but is not even close to what it was during its introduction. We're talking about the Hrud. The problem I'm going to have with this one is that they currently have updated lore. This lore contradicts their original depiction in some ways, but not others. They were originally introduced as a rat-like species, and later became something more akin to a humanoid jellyfish. They were simply a peripheral illustration on the 3rd edition, then later developed into something completely different for the Horus Heresy and the 40k fluff. This is the first depiction of the Hrud. As you can see, they're referred to as a nocturnal warrior of Hrud. Notice the crouched appearance, the rat-like tail, and the weapon of choice, a rifle of some sort. This blew my mind when I was a kid. I remember because I was like 13 when the 3rd edition book came out, and I spent hours staring at cool little gems like this one. Especially since there's a whole bunch of other lesser-known alien races in that pick. Some of which we now have rules and full codices for. As you can see, we have both a Necron and a Hrud depicted here. The Necrons did have rules in 2nd Ed, but they had a tiny army list with only a few units. It wasn't until 3.5 that they got a real codex. The Tau were not even a thing yet, thank God. And were also given life in 3.5, where I guess they decided to roll the Hrud into their fluff. Anyway, back to the Hrud. It was this rat-like appearance that led many conversion freaks like myself to start thinking about skaven in space. I realize that to some of you that may sound crazy, but to those of us that lived through Rogue Trader and 2nd edition, it's really not that weird. Especially since 40k was originally conceived as Warhammer in space. In the beginning, 40k included most of the Warhammer races, with quite a bit of overlap between the two games. So the idea of space skaven is not that weird in a world of space orcs, space elves, and space dwarves. In fact, the original intention of the artists of that obscure sketch was probably exactly that, space skaven. There were many things in Rogue Trader that borrowed from Warhammer. There were others, such as some chaos armies like beastmen and demons, as well as things like rules for siege warfare, that were intentionally written for both games at the same time. It seemed to go the other way, too. I seem to remember a Warhammer Amazon model from the 80s with a plasma pistol. Doesn't that just blow your mind? As 3rd edition progressed, they got further and further from 40k just being Warhammer in space, and made the rules with some considerable differences. By having the rules set operate differently than one another, it separated the games quite a bit and helped to give them separate personalities. This was their intention with the fluff as well. 2nd edition still had much of the Warhammer personality. This involved that adorable sense of humor I referred to in past content, 3rd edition was where it really started to get much more grim and dark. This is when we saw a true departure from 40k being Warhammer in space to being its own universe entirely. But I've gone off too far on this tangent, and we should talk more about the core subject of this video, which is the Hrud. They are the perfect example of everything I just ranted about. They were likely intended as space skaven, but we really have zero fluff to confirm this. What I will now cover is the aspects of the Hrud that make them similar to the skaven we all know and love. Then I'll talk about how they adapted them to be quite different than the skaven. Once again, this was likely done to differentiate the two games. The original depiction in the 3rd edition rulebook led us to believe that they were rat-like. Even though we can't see a face, they are a short, crouched humanoid figure with the tail of a rat. It is assumed they have a scavenger culture, very similar to the skaven. It's also assumed that both the Hrud and the skaven make use of warp-based crystals to fuel their technology. Both the Hrud and the skaven are known to dwell in subterranean tunnels, and mostly only come to the surface during the cover of nightfall, since they prefer darkness. Even the new incarnation of the Hrud are described as nocturnal. This is pretty much where it ends for similarities, however, since there was really no fluff surrounding the Space Skaven version of the Hrud. They were free to do as they wished with the future iterations. Once again, they likely did not want to do rat people in order to stay away from just making Warhammer in space. What they did eventually turn the Hrud into is pretty cool. I don't feel it's as cool as space rats, but that could just be me. There are considerable things they kept the same, and many more things that they changed. The name, Nocturnal Warrior of Hrud, stayed the same. There have been some that have put forth the theory that the Hrud we read about now are a different race than the ones in the 3rd edition rulebook. They just happen to both be from the Hrud system. I feel this is not the case, though, since Hrud is clearly where they're from, or at least first discovered, but they're both specifically referred to as a Nocturnal Warrior of Hrud. This says to me they are in fact one and the same, just changed over time to suit Games Workshop's marketing needs. So, let's get into the newer, fleshed out version of the Hrud. The modern Hrud are more jellyfish than mammal, and have sectional limbs similar in appearance to a human spine. This allows them to bend in ways that would seem unnatural to other humanoid races. They possess a mouth that has both teeth and mandibles for some reason. They also possess an exoskeleton rather than the traditional skeletal structure of other humanoid life forms. They also possess a variety of strange abilities that may or may not be warp-based. The first of these is a distortion field that makes it difficult to focus your eyes on the creature. This makes them difficult to see, even in a well-lit room. They also exude noxious and toxic fumes that can cause illness in humans when inhaled. They are also surrounded by a radiation field that causes both organic and inorganic matter to corrode and decay quite rapidly. These aspects in combination make them extremely dangerous to be around, and especially troublesome to fight against. Due to their jellyfish-like flesh, they are extremely hard to study after death. This is made worse by the fact that even their exoskeleton liquefies quite quickly, so that very little of the creature remains to be autopsied. This has kept them a mystery from those that would wish to know what makes them tick, or even how to exploit their weaknesses, if they even have any. It is likely these creatures, much like many other races in the 40k galaxy, are in fact creations of the Old Ones. This is evident from not only the fact that their abilities appear to be psychic in nature, since the fact is true that both the orcs and the Eldari are very psychic in nature, but also because they worship a similar pantheon to that of the Eldari. Not to mention the fact the only race that knows that they are intelligent and not just horrific monsters is the Eldari. The Hrud are apparently excellent record keepers, even more so than the Harlequins of the Black Library. The Hrud refer to their gods as the Sla-Hai. The chief deity of this pantheon is a being known as Ka. This roughly translates from the Hrud language as he who lingers. He appears to be one amongst the other Eldari gods, and quite possibly is the creator of the Hrud. During the War in Heaven, it was Ka who ordered the Hrud to move underground, to pursue a nocturnal and subterranean lifestyle. During the fall of the Eldari, Ka was shattered by Slaanesh, and broken to shards that were scattered throughout the galaxy. Their mythology tells us that Ka will one day return to help the Hrud defeat the Yam-Ko. Due to the similar prophecies from the Eldari, we can only assume the Yam-Ko is either Slaanesh, or at least the forces of chaos. That's all we have time for today. I feel like this was a fun one, but lacks enough information to really explore this enigmatic race and what all this means for the rest of the galaxy. If anyone has a source where I can find more information on the Hrud, please link it in the comments. I will insert here that even though this series is called Retconned and Redacted, there is actually no such thing as retconning in 40k. Games Workshop's made it quite clear that record keeping in the 41st millennium is terrible, and much is lost to destructive wars or is more legend than fact. So we need to take everything with a grain of salt and decide for ourselves what is real and what is not. I mean, it's all fiction anyway, so it doesn't really matter, does it? As long as we all have fun with it, because that's what the hobby is really about, isn't it? If you like this video, please hit the like button below and make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss out on future content. If you want to go even further and help support our content, then please head to the description below and click on a link to our Patreon campaign. For as little as $1 a video, you can help support and counter Wargaming, and it gets you a bunch of perks in return. But if a regular fee isn't your thing, you can also help us out by purchasing some swag on our Spreadshirt page, which is also linked in the description below. I hope you're all enjoying this series so far. We've got a lot more to cover, so stay tuned, and I'll see you at our next encounter.
Like a monkey in a rocket on his way back home.